I figured the next one we'd look at for this Christmas thing is Elf, which is brought to us by Jon Favreau, he was off of Swingers and Maid, but was before his relationship with Iron Man and Disney in general, and it's that in itself is an interesting direction to go as a director. But the thing that really stands out about Elf when you really look at it now is that even in 2003, this idea is something that just should never have worked in a million years, and I don't think it would have if they tried it now. And the reason I say that is because this was kind of before Will Ferrell's shtick got really, really out of hand and repetitive. Because this was even, like, as far as his filmography goes, this feels so incredibly long ago. This is even pre-Anchorman. And the idea, even now, of Will Ferrell playing a childlike elf in New York and getting involved in all the things he gets involved in would just be dismissed as a terrible, horrible idea. And I honestly can't remember if that was the thought process back then also, but it became quickly clear when people actually saw the movie how it was something a little more different and a little more special than it lets on, just based on the concept alone. Um, and talking about Favreau bringing this movie to life, that starts off with the brilliant idea to not only have Will Ferrell playing an elf that doesn't, or an elf, a human that doesn't realize he's not an elf, in a North Pole that is set inside the animation from the 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer movie. Uh, and it's, once again, even just saying this stuff, if you were describing this to somebody, I don't think they would have any idea what to think whatsoever. And while that would usually amount in disaster, it amounts into something kind of amazing. And it especially helps that we have Bob Newhart playing Papa Elf and giving us this narration that kind of brings us into this whole thing, that kind of brings this sort of old-fashioned charm to it, but the animation on top of Newhart's voice, it all just works in the best way. And there's even stuff like Peter Billingsley is here playing Ming Ming, the elf that has to assure Buddy that he's not a cotton-headed Ninny-Muggins. And the thing about that also is not only is Peter Billingsley just a frequent collaborator of Favreau's, but there's the connection that he was also Ralphie in A Christmas Story, which is also just such a welcome thing in the spirit of this movie anyway. And another thing I tend to notice, the more I watch this especially, is this is a movie where kind of embracing that sort of thing where I talk about how it kind of almost has an old-fashioned feel with them going with the 60s animation and, you know, casting Newhart and all that. You would think that they could have easily gotten away with shoddy effects, like effects that look intentionally dated or whatever, to give it that sort of old-fashioned feel. But no, the effects are like really impressive when you look at how Farrell's supposed to look huge among them and they're supposed to look tiny. And whenever they're, you know, on screen together, the effects really are quite seamless. Which is something I've still never really gotten over. How that is something they just didn't. It could be the simplest of effects, but it looks like they did not half-ass it at all, which is pretty good. And of course, talking about how this movie could have failed miserably despite all of these great aspects, if Will Ferrell himself did not work. And what's really great about this is not only does he just perfectly, you know, bring out the charm of the character and the whole, it is so believable that if anybody was gonna, you know, bring back Christmas spirit to cynical New York, that it could be this character. But on top of that, not only does he have to handle that, but something that we obviously see in a lot of Ferrell characters is his physical commitment. Whether it be actually eating the spaghetti with all that stuff on it, or getting hit by the taxi, or anything like that. And it's like, if there's one thing Will Ferrell is absolutely commendable for in his good or his bad movies, is his all-out commitment to physical comedy. To the point that I'm still not sure if this is just like some, I don't know, legend or if it's absolutely true, but the thing I'd always heard that Will Ferrell is like sort of notoriously out of shape because he ends up out of his clothes more often than he probably should. But the story I'd always heard was when he was cast on Saturday Night Live, he was actually physically fit and he intentionally got out of shape so that he could use it for comedy. And it's like I'm watching all the stuff he's done, and especially the stuff he does in Elf. I strongly believe that that's true, and wouldn't put it past him. So on top of that, where you have his, charming and funny character, you have to have the opposite of that, which is the James Caan character, who is his father, and is pretty much the exact opposite of everything he is. But the thing about that makes Caan work so well here, and he's so perfectly cast, is that he is like the despicable human being that they make him out to be, because his introductory scene is him rejecting children's books for children to a nun's face who is pleading, with him to do this. And it's like, this is a character that is a despicable human being, but the way Caan plays him is that it's very easy for us to laugh at that scene. When in another lesser movie, or with maybe a not as likable performance, despite playing, a character that's a terrible person, more or less, this it would have just there would have been no way. It would have been, first off, it would have been tonally off. To have a character that's that bad, but there's like no humor or charm to him anyway, and that's what Caan really brings to this, and like gives him a very even balance to where his character is very watchable while being a terrible person. And that's a really strong aspect throughout the movie also, because it makes us appreciate his change so much more when he gets to that point. And I think especially that works also where it's something that they don't dwell on too much, and that's the fact of when Buddy explains to him who he is, and Susan Wells and all that, and we see his demeanor change, James Caan's demeanor change, and then we see that again when he's looking back through the yearbook, and it's like, there's sort of this unspoken thing about, even though he's like still constantly throughout the movie resentful that Buddy is in his house and in his life at all, really. It's like there was definitely something between him and Susan Wells that never went away, that we can just see in these scenes with no dialogue. And it's like Buddy is basically not only his son, and there's that connection, but his last connection to her and whatever this, love was between them. And I want to say the movie could have gone more into that and should have gone more into that, but that would have maybe been a bit too heavy for the movie's tone. I think they probably do it just enough, and the fact that they use as little words as possible makes the emotion come through even more. So with that kind of setting the whole thing off, despite everything else that happens, there's an emotion, like an emotional core of the movie that's consistent enough to where it can still be there without them dwelling on stuff like that and making it too dramatic. So, because I've mentioned this numerous times, that's what a problem a lot of comedies have, especially now, is they get way too... No movie wants to be a flat-out comedy anymore. Once they get into their story, like it's almost like the director and writers always wanted to make a drama, but they were stuck making a comedy. And it's like the fact that this one is overwhelmingly comedic with those emotional beats that don't take away from anything, I think is really what helps the magic of the movie a lot. And there's obviously, individual jokes galore, whether it be the more obvious stuff like the fish out of water stuff when he's, in the elevator, or he waves to the guy trying to flag a cab or whatever. I think my personal favorite scene that's like its own individual scene is the Jack in the Box toys at the North Pole, where he has to test them. And it's to my understanding that Favreau was off screen and controlling when they would pop up with like a remote, so Will Ferrell didn't know when they were coming, which makes that all the more funny to watch. Um, and then obviously he's going to have the different individual character reactions throughout the movie. A lot of them recurring. Like there's the one-offs like Peter Dinklage or Artie Lang as the fake Santa, but then there's the continuous ones like I think it's probably one of my favorite things in the movie, and that is his constant back and forth between Faison Love at the store, and the way they have those yes it is, no it isn't back and forths, and it's like the Faison Love's character like they're having these childish arguments, but he so firmly stands his ground on whatever side he is, whether it be yes it is or no it isn't. That is never not funny to me every time it happens. Um, and then we have the Zoe Deschanel thing, which in this story, like we have his relationship with James Caan and the back and forth between them, and then we've got the whole the really nice thing going on with him and his little brother, and the way that kind of forms throughout, and how he's kind of like his wingman when he asks her out and all that. He's got a lot of really potent like relationship type stuff going on here. So giving him a love story is probably just about the least interesting direction they could have gone, and the least interesting thing they could have put in here. But Deschanel's performance is so charming, and the way they deal with it with like it's a brief montage, their date, but it's like it doesn't it's there's enough there and it conveys enough that it doesn't feel like they're just dismissing this part of the story like they would be. Like it doesn't feel like it's here by obligation. There is like a genuine heart to it in those scenes, so I do appreciate that. Though it does seem a bit almost prophetic that their first real run-in, their first big notable run-in, is using the song "Baby It's Cold Outside" in a it's almost prophetic in the fact that "Baby It's Cold Outside" is used in this movie in a scene where Zoe Deschanel abruptly feels violated in this moment, where he innocently goes in there while she's in the shower, not really putting two and two together because of his naivete, of course. And given the song's current reputation, yeah. So, and then there's just characters scattered throughout, like we mentioned, Peter Dinklage, who has an amazing scene. It's probably one of the more, of all the things he's done in his career up to this point, it's probably one of the most, like, scenes in his entire career that people remember him for the most. And his, just, the way he plays it so incredibly straight. I can't get enough of the way he says, "No tomatoes, tomatoes are too vulnerable." It's just kind of brilliant. And the way he's gradually introduced. There's also the interaction with the guy in the mailroom. The guy that looks way too old to be the 26-year-old he claims to be. But that's a really great scene between the two of them also. I also really, really love Deborah, the secretary, and their interactions, just the way she speaks to him like he's 5 years old. All of that, like every time he interacts with a new character, it works, and it's great, especially when it's a recurring character, like Deborah or Faison Love or something. And then it eventually gets to the point where, yeah, we're going to have the downer moment, the conflict, where James Caan finally blows his top for the last time in the Peter Dinklage scene. And what I really love about that in this movie is that in most movies, this is the moment that we don't really care. It's kind of the moment we dread, and not for any emotional factor or any investment factor, but because we know formula, and it's like, oh, this is when everybody gets sad, and we have to wait for them to resolve this, and the movie's just going to kind of sulk. But it's like really, it's such a genuine moment where Caan's anger feels so real, and Buddy's reaction, where it's it's like the first time in the movie that Buddy just can't say anything. He's just so torn down and just has to run out of the room and obey what James Caan tells him to do. And it really, truly, it doesn't feel like the script saying, okay, this is the bummer moment. It's genuinely a bummer when that happens. And you sort of can't wait for that reconciliation. And honestly, I think that might be enough for the movie. Like, that's enough conflict. And then we eventually get it's the cliche scene, and it's not really built up too much, because we have Michael Lerner, who's playing like the main boss to James Caan's character, and it's the big payoff scene where Caan, tells him to shove it up his ass, and he leaves with his son. Um, Even despite the fact of Lerner only getting one other scene prior to that to set that up, it's still a really satisfying moment. And I think it's less about him standing up to the boss and more about just his character arc in general, like leading up to that point, that makes it a really good moment. So it's like it's taking all this cliche stuff, but just doing it so well that it works. And that stuff works so well that I have always thought, I think even when I was a kid when it came out, I was like 12 or 13 when it came out, the entire thing in Central Park always felt so unnecessary to me. And I know that because they set it up basically. I mean, they're technically setting it up through the whole movie because everybody in New York is so cynical, but it's fucking New York. It's it's just gonna be that way no matter what. So really, the only setup to this is sort of one moment at the beginning when Newhart's like, "Hey, look at the thing. It means that the spirit of Christmas is going down, or whatever the hell," and that there's a whole giant climax around this. Just feels kind of really tacked on, and like they just needed a big climax. And it's, yeah, I thought everything leading up to that was kind of satisfying enough that I always kind of get worn out on the movie throughout this climax, and it's just it's really a bunch of pointless stuff. Like bringing in the whole Central Park Rangers thing, like it's a really, really huge deal that doesn't amount to anything. There's the really pointless moment where James Caan takes the Santa suit from Santa and puts it on to distract them and say, "Hey, I'm actually Santa," to kind of throw them off, and they just plow right through him. Worthless. You could cut that whole thing out, and nothing is lost. I don't know. Um, that's kind of what the whole climax feels like to me, but it doesn't take away from everything before it, and there's still some nice moments in it. Particularly him, like, going through the list, and that's how he proves it to everybody that's watching and all that, and then his moment with the news girl there. So, yeah. But overall, it is, that doesn't, weigh down the rest of the movie by any means. It's still fantastic and hilarious and heartwarming and everything that it needs to be. So there's that. And then it was, I still don't know what this is. I never really looked into it or cared to investigate it. But there was like that, what is it? It's like there was like an animated remake that was like a TV special or something. I don't know. I hadn't heard of it, and I came across it just on TV randomly like a couple years ago without knowing it existed. And it felt like a hallucination or something. it was bizarre, but apparently that exists. So yeah. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this one. So I think the next one is going to be much less appropriate and much less, family friendly, which means you probably know exactly which one that one is. So until that and all the other stuff we'll be doing, I think